Talent development leader. For years, you have trusted ATD to develop your team. Now ATD is elevating its content, communities, and capabilities to develop you. Talent development leader is ATD's brand for your professional development, providing content that fosters and promotes your thought leadership, community that progresses with your career, and capabilities backed by ATD's capability model that keep you on the leading edge of the field. Welcome to ATD's Talent Development Leader podcast, featuring monthly conversations with the greatest influencers in the talent development field. We cover the latest trends, hot topics, and future-focused ideas that current and aspiring TD leaders need to know. Learn more by visiting www.td.org and searching for Talent Development Leader podcast. Today, I'm joined by 2023 Chief Learning Officer of the Year, Michelle Braden, who has 25 plus years of experience in the learning and development space. Currently, Michelle is Vice President of Global Talent Development at WEX, where she has built an award-winning learning organization quickly during the past 4+ years. Michelle is passionate about learning and development, and about using her business savvy and leadership expertise to look beyond typical adult learning strategies and towards innovative talent development approaches that drive true business impact and help employees unleash their potential. She is laser focused on enabling team members of WEX to grow as individuals and professionals in their careers while delivering upon business goals and providing world-class services and solutions in the financial technology industry. Michelle was formerly Chief Learning Officer and Vice President of Global Learning Excellence at TELUS International, where, along with her globally based team, she built a multi-award-winning learning strategy, which fundamentally changed how the organization built and maintained a robust leadership pipeline to support its fast growth while providing team members with a comprehensive learning journey throughout their TI career. Hi, Michelle. Thank you for joining me.
Hi, Anne. Happy to be here.
So we're taking a different approach with this episode of the podcast. I'd like to call it a special interest episode. And the timing couldn't be better. We have 20 to 30 minutes with the Chief Learning Officer of the Year, which is an award you received just days ago, right, Michelle?
Yeah, just a couple days ago.
So I wanted to take this time to ask some questions about your career and your passion areas within learning and development. I know our listeners can learn a lot from who you are and where you've been. But first, I'd love to hear more about your experience winning the highly esteemed Chief Learning Officer of the Year award this week.
Well, first off, let me say it was quite the surprise. I mean, I was very emotional when I first found out, and I'm humbled and honored by the recognition from my industry peers. There's so many CLOs, fellow CLOs that I know that I just really admire and look up to. And to be, in a group of people who are selected as CLO of the Year is just like, I don't know, it's like a lifetime achievement award, if you ask me.
Yep.
It's been a lifetime, actually. But it's a really great feeling, and it's just awesome to have that external recognition.
Well, it's truly deserved. And so I'm so happy for you, and I'm glad you had the experience you did this week. And I'd love to talk about your career. So again, as I said, I think I know listeners can learn a lot from where you've been, where you are now, and where you're going. You've held management roles at Xerox and SAP, and you went on to lead and transform the learning functions at TELUS and now WEX, leading your teams to win multiple awards at both companies. And I think that's what's really cool, right? So you've won this huge accolade this week, and you've led your teams to win many awards at both TELUS and WEX. And I think that kind of speaks to what you've done and how you've transformed the functions at those companies. I understand you began your career in IT and progressed into sales, which is super interesting. From there, how did you find your way into the learning and development field?
So, back in 2000. So I'd always been, so I did start in IT, and I quickly, so as I move up the ladder in IT, I got so isolated from people, and I'm really a people person. And I was the one who they'd ask, can you go teach this end user how to use this software function or whatever? And I was like, okay. And then I really liked it. I loved seeing the light bulbs go on. And so I took a role as a sales analyst, like a sales engineer, helping sales reps with a company that sold microfiche recorders, and they were part of General Dynamics, and that was so much fun because entered into this whole new world of meeting with customers, and I had to teach them how to use the product and everything. And I spent a lot of time with salespeople, and so I kind of fell in love with that whole sales sort of role. It is a lot of stress, though. I didn't really like that, but when I left Xerox, I joined SAP while I was working on my master's, my MBA. And at SAP, I I was working. I discovered a lot of the different industry magazines, like Chief Learning Officer Magazine, T&D, Talent Development, et cetera. And I was like, these are so interesting. The articles were so interesting because I'd always been like a functional trainer, like technology. I could teach you how to read a core dump or how to sell to a really difficult buyer, but I could not figure out like how do you develop leaders? How do you develop, what's career development? How do you develop employees? And that's what I discovered in the pages of those magazines. And I looked for every single one of them I could find. And it was just at the beginning, I think, when Google was starting to come around, and so I would Google a lot of stuff and try to learn as much as I could about that. And I was like, okay, I want to be in that space. So right after I joined SAP, they gave me a choice. You either stay in the sales university or you go to HR. And I'm like, I want to go to HR. I want to go learn. I've never been there. I want to learn what that's like. And that was really fun because I was learning all about enterprise learning and just all sorts of things, how you could really transform a company if you focused on learning and development. So that's how I started and got into this role, this kind of side of learning and development. And then, I stayed at SAP for a number of years until 2012, and I left and went to work for TELUS International. Now, here's a little thing about me. I am one of those people who I love adventure. So anything new, like I think, when I was a little kid, I wanted to be either a child psychologist or a cowgirl. I mean, I'm still a little adventurous like that. Like I just still like look at things a little bit differently. And so I went to TELUS because they had sites in Guatemala and the Philippines. And I'm like, never been there. So that might be fun. So I went there. But one of the things that they needed was a learning strategy. They had a team of maybe, 4 or 5 trainers, and they were handling all the training for the people across the company, which at the time was only 13,000 people. And by the time I left in 2019, they had over 35,000 people. But when I first started, I was like, okay, so I'm brought in here to do something with learning and development. I wasn't a chief learning officer yet. They just said, we need a learning strategy. And I was trying to figure out why. And that was really the beginning of, trying to figure out how do you truly transform. I took all that learning that I had discovered working on my MBA and then tried to apply it and built this learning strategy that, ultimately won a lot of awards. And then that led to where I am today. The same sort of thing, building another learning strategy from scratch.
Amazing. It was your destiny. You discovered.
My destiny. And a little bit of the cowgirl comes out every now and then.
How so?
Well, I don't think traditionally. Like I'm very much, I mean, you could say maybe I'm on the wild, wild west side a lot of the time. Mm-hmm. I tend to challenge the status quo. Mm-hmm. I tend to, I have this knack that people have pointed out since I was young. And I mean, like, I really like logic puzzles and any kind of puzzle. I love puzzles. But I have this knack for being able to take something really complex and simplify it, break it down to like, what are we really talking about here? And it's a unique, I never thought it was unique till people started pointing it out to me. But somebody told me just a few weeks ago, they said they've never seen anyone who was able to take a whole bunch of disparate information and assimilate it into a couple really important thoughts. And I'm like, doesn't everybody do that? I mean, but that's one of my strengths. So I think that's where the cowgirl comes in, because I just I look at it differently, and I try to pull out, what are really the key pieces here that are good, and get the message across to people. I mean, people don't remember complex stuff. They remember simple stuff. They remember stories.
Well, I will absolutely co-sign that. I feel lucky to know you and to get to spend time with you a few times a year. And I've seen you contribute that immensely to different executive groups. Just the ability to cut through the noise, take something that is complex and make it simple. And I think people mistake simple for, it's not basic, it's profound, right? It's clear, it's succinct, it's powerful. So yeah, I absolutely think that's a strength of yours, and I'm sure it's gotten you to where you are today.
Well, I always tell my teams, let's keep this simple. And they think I think at the beginning they thought I meant easy. And I'm like, no, it's not easy. Trust me. The simpler you make something, the more complex it is in the back end.
Mm.
But remember who we're dealing with. We're dealing with employees and leaders, and we want them to remember the stuff that we're doing. We want them to learn. They're not going to learn when it's complex. They're going to learn when it's simple ideas and they can connect it very easily. And it's written, and like you said, it's profound. It really makes a difference. They're going to remember that. And so I have someone who used to report to me at my last company, and she used to say to the team all the time, she's like, Michelle's going to tell you to simplify this. I have never once heard her tell somebody to make it more complicated or complex. She's going to tell you to simplify this. Yeah. And she's right. Like, I love when stuff gets broken down, like into, here are the 5 things you need to know, right? Or, here, let me summarize this for you. Mm-hmm. And I just love that. I think it's the best way to teach people.
I think that's an important distinction too, right? It's simple for the stakeholder or the end user, right? And really around that messaging component that you mentioned, the story or the narrative that you're sharing. Yeah.
Right.
So it's been interesting talking about your career and these moments, different inflection points. I'd love to hear what stands out for you along the way, perhaps what you're most proud of achieving, and maybe a learning moment, kind of an aha or an epiphany along the journey.
Oh, I have a ton of those. People think that your whole career has been successful. Mine has not. I've had to reinvent myself a couple times, maybe 3. There was a time early in my career that I had 2 managers, neither coast, tell me I wasn't tolerant enough. I wasn't empathetic enough. I needed to bring people along with my ideas. And not everyone's as smart as you, Michelle. So you need to be a little, anyway. I mean, it took me a while to figure out what that meant, actually. And I was very young. And so I was trying to figure it out. And what they really meant was I needed to be more empathetic. And so I worked really hard on that. And I think today, people who report to me, work in my teams, would say that I'm probably one of the more empathetic leaders they've ever worked with. But I've worked really hard at it. I've also had times where, I have an idea and I've kind of pushed it farther than it should be pushed. And I remember at one point I did a lot of self-reflection. I almost got fired from one company, and I did a lot of self-reflection, like, what could I do differently to still make an impact but not rub people the wrong way? So I went back and I said, okay, so for the next 3 months, I'm going to look at every single day, the work I did for that day. And I'm going to say, did I make any progress on my projects? If I made just a little bit of progress, okay, there we go. That's good. Little progress is good. But it's even better if I did it without upsetting anybody, like getting people mad at me. And so every day I looked at the day like that. And if I met both of those 2 criteria, I checked it off as it was a good day. And I racked up several months worth of those good days. And my boss, who was going to fire me, said, you have made a miraculous transformation. She goes, I've never seen anyone transform so quickly. And, I think if you're motivated by keeping your job, it kind of like is a help. But at the same time, it was like, being able to stop and be, have some self awareness and really look at what could I do differently. And another piece, though, that's really transformed the way I think about things and has had a huge impact on my career is when I read Don Miguel Ruiz's book, The Four Agreements. And it's not a business book, but it's a book about life essentially. And I summarize it in the Michelle way. So I simplify it. I've never read, God's honest truth, I've never read it cover to cover. I've read the four things, assimilated it, decided what I thought it meant, and then I went with it. And I use this when I talk with my teams, but it's like the first agreement is not to take things personally. Like it's typically not about you. Like people act certain ways because of the stress about them or something that's going on in their life. And then the second one is don't make assumptions. Because when you make assumptions, you're probably always wrong. Like it's just not good to make assumptions. And the third one is be impeccable with your word. So, I interpret that a couple ways. I think he meant it to be don't gossip about people. But I think that's part of it. But I also think if you say you're going to do something, do it. And then the fourth one is really do your best. And all those agreements are really difficult. But if you do your best at trying to achieve those agreements and you also do your best just at everything you do, then, I think you can really fulfill your dreams if you do that. And there's just basic life skills that work at work, at home, wherever. Work with my kids. And then there's a fifth agreement that came out since then. It's called Be Skeptical, but Learn to Listen. And I really attribute that more to critical thinking, which I think is getting lost in, our world these days and I mentioned Google before, but I think people tend to rely too much on Google. They rely too much on ChatGPT. And so they need to really stop and have some discernment and be skeptical and listen to what's going on and do their own research and think critically about it. That's really helped me in my career.
Well, I think it's pretty phenomenal that you've not only transformed a couple of learning functions, but you've transformed yourself a couple of times throughout the years. If we could all be so lucky to evolve into different versions and better versions of ourselves, I think, but certainly a lot more than luck, right? You did the work. And I think that speaks volumes about who you are as a person and a leader.
It's very humbling to do that work, by the way.
Yeah. Speaking of I'd love to talk a little bit about leadership before we wrap up today. But I enjoy the story you've shared with me a couple of times about I think it was maybe one of your first leadership roles as president of the Parent-Teacher Association at your child's school, and what you learned from that experience and kind of how that's informed who you are as a leader today.
Yeah, well, that was a very interesting experience. The school came to me and asked me if I would run for PTO president. And I didn't know that I was the only one on the ballot. So, of course, I became PTO president. But the thing that I learned about that is that I started to approach it like I would business stuff, but I realized that it's really difficult to influence people who don't have to be there, like the rest of the board members, their volunteers, the teachers, the parents, everybody. And I did it for a couple of years. And throughout that time period, I really worked hard on influencing. Like the first couple of months were horrible. Like every idea that I had, I couldn't convince anybody to do anything. And I think I actually had a couple board members quit. But then I was like, okay, so I have to figure out how do I really, share an idea and then help them make them think it's their idea. Like it was like really like that whole it's like the value proposition of the idea. Like what's the value to them? And to the point where I got so good at it that they thought that all the great ideas were their great ideas. So I'm like, okay, that's fine. I don't need the credit for it. I just want these things to get done. So we actually, with that team, I had actually created a whole communication strategy that with a website and newsletters and all these ways we were dealing with the teachers and the parents. And the school district came and said, can we adopt this strategy for the whole school district?
Wow.
And I'm like, okay, that's good. You can do that. I mean, I don't know why you need to ask permission, but okay.
Yeah. I love that lesson about influence. I think that's widely applicable for all listeners. So any leadership advice for TD leaders who are listening to this podcast? Certainly they're in roles in their organizations where you've probably been at one point. They face challenges that you've faced throughout your career. So certainly you understand them, you understand where they are, and some of the things they're passionate about, and also the barriers that they're facing. What charge would you give them about how they show up for their people and for their organizations?
So, I've mentored several learning professionals, and I've also had I've obviously had several teams. And I think I have two kind of categories of advice. One is I've had learning professionals that feel like they have to show the clients, their internal clients, how smart they are by creating all this learning and making it really complex and whatnot. And I wrote this chapter, as you know, Do More with Less and Forward Focused Learning that ATD published. And one of my things in there is around don't develop things that you can purchase. Like if you can purchase it off the shelf, maybe even if you have to tweak it, just do that. It's so much more economical, and your time is so valuable. Spend that on the stuff that only you can do. I think one of the great leadership quotes is around a leader should only do the work that they can do. Let others do the other stuff. So anyway, I think that's a really important point for TD leaders. But I think a TD leader who leads a team, I've seen this happen, is where your budget gets cut, and so you cut the development of your own team. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is that I really prioritize the development of my own team. I want to make sure that each individual is equipped to do the job, to do the role, and that they feel really good about it. I empower my teams, and the first time I empowered somebody on my team was literally really scary. But sometimes people have some great ideas, and this I really learned this at TELUS. I mean, working with people in Guatemala and the Philippines, they think differently. They've got a different educational system, and the first time I empowered them to go, figure something out, I was like shocked with what they came back with, in a good way. Like I was like, holy moly, I never would have thought of that. That's a great idea. And the more I did it, the better I felt. And I thought, this is really helping them in their development. So I make sure that each quarter I have a development conversation with my direct reports, and they all have one with their direct reports as well. And we talk about and it's not just going to a class, right? It's not doing that kind of stuff. We talk about what are the things that are going to help them really grow their skills. Like who could maybe be a good mentor for them, or what's a good project that would help them. And my team will tell you that I have an accelerated development strategy, and I call it throwing people into the deep end of the pool, but I'm always standing there with the life preserver on the side. I don't let anyone drown. But I do give people challenges that I know that they're capable of, but they've never done before. And the first time someone gets one of those from me, there's a little bit of panic. Yeah, they're a little bit like, what did she do? But then they do it, and then they start looking forward to it. They're looking forward to these challenges because they know it's going to accelerate their career. So I think it's kind of a little trick, and it's a lot. I think it's a lot more meaningful than going to a class, even though a class is good because it provides a lot of foundational things that people need to learn. But you learn more on the job, and actually doing the experiential learning is so much stronger and it's so much more lasting. So those are my tips. Is that don't be afraid to focus and prioritize on your team's development. And it doesn't matter if they become the better instructional designer than you were, or if they know how to use Adobe Captivate better than you do. It doesn't matter. You want them there. You want these excellent facilitators, excellent instructional designers, excellent curriculum developers. You want those people to surround you. And that's how you're going to transform your learning strategy, because you cannot do it by yourself.
Wow, that's excellent. Mic drop. And we're done. Yeah, I mean, I think I've actually never considered that before, right? The advice about developing your team above all else. And I think, especially when budgets are cut, right? That's the first thing, but it's the last thing people are thinking about is how do I take care of myself and my team, right? It's it's the business. So I think that's excellent. I think it flips everything on its head in a really powerful way.
Well, and you know what? People want to be on my team because of that.
Yeah.
Because they know. I had somebody a couple years ago say to me, I told my dad that because of you, I'm doing work that it would have normally taken me 10 years to get to do. So I think it builds loyalty, right?
So last question for you, Michelle, as we wrap up here. What are you really excited about now, besides your CLO award, of course? And what's next for you?
So I am working on a couple more projects, which I think might be award winning. Who knows? But I'm excited about the work that I'm doing right now with our executive team. I think it's really important work for, especially at this point in time in the world with all the craziness going on. I think it's going to help us be more solid and be more prepared for the future and what it holds. Next for me, I think, I do have my eyes set on consulting, going into retirement and consulting, maybe doing some fractional CLO work. I would like to write a book. Of course, everybody writes a book, but I actually think I have a lot to say in a book. So, and I am certified as an executive coach. And so I would like to do some, coaching on the side as well. And I don't get to do it. I coach internally here, but I would like to do it externally. Is that enough? I mean, that sounds like a lot. I don't know.
Well, you'll certainly be busy.
I'll be busy. Yes.
Yeah. Well, Michelle, thank you so much for your time today, just for sharing your insights, your career experiences, your advice to listeners. I've learned a lot, and I'm excited for listeners to get to hear from you as well. So I appreciate your time.
This was really fun. And I love, love, love talking with you, Anne. So anytime, my pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this podcast by the Association for Talent Development. If you found this show insightful or useful, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share it with a colleague.